It's a Tuesday morning. It's raining outside. Not a soft, romantic rain, but the kind that beats against your windows and floods your gutters. You're in your kitchen making your second cup of coffee, still wearing your husband's oversized hoodie, listening to your kids argue upstairs about whose turn it is to pick the cartoon. Everything is ordinary. Everything is yours. And then the doorbell rings. You open the door and standing on your porch, soaking wet, luggage at her feet, mascara running down her face, is the woman who looked you dead in the eye 9 years ago and said, "If you marry that man, you are no longer my daughter." Your mother. And before you can even process what your eyes are seeing, before you can decide whether to cry or slam the door or just stand there with your mouth open, she says 5 words that will change everything. I need somewhere to stay. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I've missed you every single day. Just a demand, wrapped in desperation. Delivered at my door like she hadn't spent 9 years pretending I didn't exist. That moment, right there on that rain-soaked Tuesday, is where this story ends. But to understand why those 5 words broke something open inside me that I didn't even know was still sealed shut, you need to hear the whole story. From the very beginning. Stay with me. This one is gonna take a while. And I promise you, every second is worth it. Before we get into it, I need you to do something for me. Scroll down to those comments right now and drop where you're watching from. City, state, country, I don't care how small or how far. I am building a community here of people who understand what it means to choose love when the whole world tells you not to. So let me know where you are. Let's see how far this story travels. My name is Cassidy Ann Mercer, and when this story begins, I am 24 years old. My name is Cassidy Ann Mercer. I am 24 years old. I want you to understand who Cassidy at 24 was, because she is almost unrecognizable to me now, and not in a bad way. She was a good girl, a rule follower, the kind of daughter who called home every Sunday without being asked, who brought store-bought pie to every holiday dinner and pretended it was homemade because her mother had high standards, and Cassidy had never quite learned to say no to those standards. I grew up in Millhaven, Georgia. And yes, before you ask, yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. A small town tucked into the red clay hills of North Georgia. Population just under 12,000, with 2 Baptist churches, a Piggly Wiggly, a diner that had been run by the same family since 1967, and an unofficial but very well-enforced social rulebook that nobody ever wrote down because nobody needed to. Everybody in Millhaven knew the rules. And the biggest rule, the one that ran underneath everything else like a current you couldn't see but could always feel, was this: you stay with your own kind. It wasn't always said out loud. In fact, most of the people in my life would have been deeply offended if you'd called them racist. They'd have pointed to the black family that lived 2 streets over and said, "We waved the Johnsons every single morning." They'd have told you about the one black girl who was on the cheerleading squad and how everyone just loved her to pieces. They'd have used phrases like, "I don't see color," and "I just think people are happiest with their own," and "It's not about race, it's about culture," as if those were different things. My parents, Robert and Patricia Mercer, were products of that world. They were not monsters. I want to be very clear about that, because this story is not a story about monsters. My father, Robert, was a man who coached Little League for 15 years, who cried at my high school graduation, who kept a photo of me in his wallet from the time I was 7 years old until, well, I'll get to that. My mother, Patricia, made the best biscuits in the county, volunteered at the church food pantry every 3rd Saturday, and had a laugh that could fill a whole room. They were good people who held very bad beliefs. And for 24 years, I loved them without questioning those beliefs, because they were the water I swam in. You don't question water when you're swimming in it. You just breathe. My sister Jolene was 2 years older than me and had done everything right. Married a man named Travis Whitfield who sold insurance and coached Travis Jr.'s football team, lived 4 miles from our parents' house, and came to Sunday dinner every single week. Jolene was the blueprint. Jolene was the proof that the plan worked. And I loved Jolene. I genuinely did. But I also spent my whole childhood measuring myself against her and coming up about an inch short. I'd gone to the University of Georgia for college, studied communications, came back to Millhaven after graduation because the economy was rough and because Patricia Mercer had a way of making you feel like Georgia was the only place in the world that truly made sense. I was working at a local marketing firm. Small, 3 people. We mostly handled social media for local businesses and the occasional regional campaign. And I was dating a man named Brandon who sold tractors and had a very firm handshake and absolutely zero interest in anything I had to say. That was my life. It was small and it was safe, and it was, if I'm being completely honest, slowly suffocating me. And then I went to Atlanta. It was a work trip. My boss, Karen, a sharp, funny woman who wore red lipstick every single day and was the only person in Millhaven I genuinely admired, had landed us a contract with a mid-sized tech company based in Atlanta. They needed help with brand identity and social content strategy. We drove up on a Monday morning for a 3-day consulting kickoff. The tech company was called Meridian Solutions. They occupied 2 floors of a glass building in Midtown, and walking into their lobby that first morning, I felt something shift in my chest. The particular dislocation you feel when the world suddenly gets bigger than you expected it to be. I remember the details of that morning with the kind of sharpness that only happens when life is about to turn a corner. The lobby smelled like coffee and something faintly cedar. There was a mural on the wall, a sprawling, colorful thing full of geometric shapes and what looked like constellations. The receptionist had her natural hair in the most spectacular twist out I'd ever seen, and she greeted us with a warmth that felt completely genuine, which was not something I associated with corporate lobbies. And then Marcus walked in. Marcus Okafor. He was the creative director at Meridian. He was 30 years old, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, the son of Nigerian immigrants who had come to this country with 2 suitcases and a plan. He was tall, 6'2", and he had a way of walking into a room that I can only describe as purposeful, like every step was intentional. He had the kind of face that looked different every time the light changed, and a smile that arrived slowly, like it was being considered first. He shook my hand and said, "You must be Cassidy. Karen's told me good things." And I said something completely embarrassing like, "All true, I hope," which is the kind of thing you say when your brain momentarily loses access to original thought. We spent 3 days in that office, working, genuinely working. There were presentations and whiteboards and long conversations about brand voice and audience segmentation and content calendars. But in the margins of all of that work, between the meetings and the coffee runs and the late afternoon when everyone else had gone home and Marcus and I were still at the conference table going over strategy decks, something else was happening. He made me laugh. Not politely, not the way you laugh in a professional setting to smooth things over, but really laugh. The kind that catches you off guard and makes you momentarily forget where you are. He was smart in a way I hadn't encountered much in my life. Smart and curious and genuinely interested in ideas. And he had this ability to ask questions that made you feel like your answer was the most important thing he'd heard all day. On the second evening, the whole team went to dinner. Karen, me, Marcus, and 2 of his colleagues. Afterward, Karen announced she was exhausted and headed back to the hotel. And somehow Marcus and I ended up walking along Piedmont Avenue for 2 hours, talking about nothing and everything. He told me about growing up as the son of immigrants, about the particular pressure of carrying your parents' sacrifice in your chest everywhere you go. He told me about studying graphic design at NC State, about the job he'd had in New York for 3 years that paid well and made him miserable, about why he'd come to Atlanta. He asked me about Millhaven, and I told him about it in the careful way you describe a place you're not sure how to feel about, with affection and discomfort in equal measure. "It sounds like you've outgrown it," he said simply. Nobody had ever said that to me before. Not because they hadn't noticed, but because in my world, outgrowing your hometown wasn't something you were supposed to do. You were supposed to stay grateful for it. "Maybe," I said. "Not maybe," he said. And he smiled at me. That slow, considered smile. And something inside me shifted in a way that was permanent. I went home to Millhaven 2 days later. I broke up with Brandon the following weekend. He took it very calmly, which told me everything I needed to know about how present either of us had really been in that relationship. Marcus texted me 3 days after I got home. Just, "I keep thinking about that conversation. Can we keep having it?" And I wrote back, "Yes." For 7 months, Marcus and I conducted our relationship across the 2 hours of highway between Millhaven and Atlanta. We talked every night. We visited each other on weekends. Sometimes I drove up, sometimes he drove down. And when he drove down, I always felt a low-grade anxiety that I'm ashamed to admit I felt. Not because of anything he did. Because of what Millhaven was. I was always watching for the looks people gave him. I was always scanning for the moment something would happen that I'd have to explain or apologize for or smooth over. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Marcus was perceptive in the way people are perceptive when they've spent their whole lives having to read rooms just to stay safe. One evening we were walking out of the diner on Main Street, the one that had been there since 1967, and an older man I'd known my whole life, a friend of my father's named Dale, stopped us. He looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at Marcus and said, "Cassidy Mercer, didn't know you were seeing someone." The pause before seeing someone held an entire world. Marcus put his hand on the small of my back and said pleasantly, "Nice to meet you," and kept walking. When we got to the parking lot, I started to say something, I'm not even sure what, and Marcus said, "You don't have to apologize for him." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry anyway." He looked at me for a long moment. "Cass, I need you to understand something. I'm not surprised by any of this. I've been black my whole life. I know exactly what that pause meant. What I need to know, what matters to me, is where you stand." It was the most important question anyone had ever asked me. "With you," I said. "Completely." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Then we're fine." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true, because there was still my family. I had not told my parents about Marcus yet. 7 months in, and I had not told them. I told myself this was because the relationship was still new, still private, still mine. But the truth I was not yet ready to look at directly, was that I was afraid. Not of losing Marcus, of losing them. I told my parents about Marcus on a Sunday in October. I'd been rehearsing it for weeks. I'd told myself I would be calm and matter-of-fact, and that I would not let their reaction dictate how I felt about the relationship. I was wrong about all of it. We were at Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, with the yellow kitchen and the cross-stitched Bible verses on the wall, and the smell of Patricia Mercer's pot roast filling every room. Jolene and Travis were there. Travis Jr., who was 7, was running around in the backyard. It was, by every external measure, a completely normal Sunday. After dinner, when we were all at the table and my mother was refilling sweet tea and my father was talking about the Braves this season, I said, "I've been seeing someone. I'd like to tell you all about him." Everyone looked at me. My mother sat down. My father set his glass down. "His name is Marcus Okafor," I said. "He's a creative director at a tech company in Atlanta. He's 30 years old. He's from Charlotte. His parents are from Nigeria originally. He's incredibly smart and kind, and he makes me happier than I've been in a long time." I paused. "And he's black." The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then my mother said, "Oh, Cassidy." Not, "Oh, how wonderful." Not, "Tell me about him." Just, "Oh, Cassidy." The way you'd say it if someone told you they'd gotten a terrible diagnosis. My father said nothing. He picked up his sweet tea and looked at the window. Jolene looked at Travis. Travis looked at his plate. "I'm happy, Mom," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "He's a good man." "I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person," my mother said, in a tone that communicated she was not at all sure of this. "But Cassidy, you have to think about..." About what? About how things work. She looked at me with an expression that was, I think, meant to convey that she was saying this for my benefit. People are happiest with their own kind. That's just what, I said. And that was where the first crack opened. We argued. Not screamed. My family was not a screaming family. We did cold, controlled, I'm very disappointed arguments. My mother talked about what people would say and the children, which was theoretical and presumptuous in equal measure. My father said almost nothing, which was somehow worse. Jolene said she just worried about me, which I knew was code for something else. I drove home that night shaking. Not from anger, from grief. Because some part of me had known, quietly, in the back of my heart, that this was how it would go. And hoping it wouldn't go this way had been its own kind of foolishness. I called Marcus from the parking lot of my apartment complex, still sitting in my car. "How'd it go?" he asked. He already knew. Something in my voice had told him in the first syllable. "About how we expected," I said. "I'm sorry, Cass." "It's not your fault?" "I know it's not my fault," he said. "I'm sorry it happened to you." That, "to you," cracked me open. Because he understood that the loss was mine. That he had not caused it. That the people who claimed to love me were the ones choosing this outcome, not him. And he was steady for me in that moment, the way he would be steady for me in every hard moment that came after it. "I'm not giving you up," I told him. "Good," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere." The 6 months after that Sunday dinner were the hardest of my life up to that point. And I say up to that point because I have since learned that life is creative in its difficulties. My parents didn't immediately disown me. What they did was wage a slow, grinding campaign of disapproval that operated on multiple fronts simultaneously. My mother called me every few days. The calls always started normally, weather, work, neighborhood gossip, and then reliably, like a car turning onto a road it had been on 1,000 times, she would arrive at the subject of Marcus, always obliquely at first. Have you been spending much time in Atlanta lately? Or, Brandon Hewitt is still single. I ran into his mother at the Piggly Wiggly, and then, when I didn't take the off-ramp more directly, I just think you need to consider your future, Cassidy. I'm not saying he's not a nice man. I'm saying that life is complicated enough without adding complications. My father sent me exactly one text during this entire period. It said, "Your mother worries about you. I hope you're making good decisions." 6 months of my life summed up in 2 sentences. Jolene tried harder, I'll give her that. She called more often and her objections were softer, cushioned in the language of concern. She told me she had Googled Marcus, which I found both touching and invasive. She said he seemed impressive. Then she said, "But Cass, have you thought about what your kids would go through?" I said, "You mean being biracial in America?" She said, "I mean the complications." I said, "They're children. Their complications come from the world, not from their parents loving each other." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I just don't want you to lose this family." And I remember thinking, then stop making me choose. Marcus came to Millhaven 3 more times during those 6 months. Each time, I didn't tell my parents he was there. Each time, that secrecy sat in my chest like a stone. Marcus never complained about it. He never pressured me. But I could see, in the careful way he never asked about my family, in the way he'd grown quiet when I talked about Sunday dinners, that the secrecy had a cost. Not because he was insecure, because he deserved better. And I knew it. The pivot point came in April when Marcus took me to Charlotte to meet his family. The Okafor family lived in a neighborhood in southeast Charlotte in a house that had been paid off for 15 years. Marcus's parents, Emmanuel and Grace, had come from Enugu, Nigeria. In 1988, Emmanuel had gotten a graduate degree in civil engineering. Grace had worked as a nurse for 30 years. Between them, they had built, with no exaggeration, one of the most dignified, warm, and intentional family lives I have ever witnessed. They welcomed me with a meal that took Grace 2 days to prepare. Jollof rice, fried plantains, a goosey soup, and a chicken dish that I asked for the recipe for and have been attempting to replicate for 9 years with imperfect results. Marcus's younger sister, Adayaz, was there, 26 and sharp as a tack, studying public health at UNC. His older brother, Chukwemeka, who went by Emeka, was there with his wife Priya and their 2 children. I sat at that table and I felt something I had not expected to feel, completely comfortable. Not because they were performing anything for me, not because they were trying to impress me or sell me on their family, just because this was genuinely who they were. They asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. They laughed loudly and argued about football and told embarrassing stories about Marcus that made him put his head in his hands. Emmanuel pulled me aside after dinner. He was a tall man with a formal bearing and precise, careful speech, and I was a little intimidated by him. He said, "My son has not brought a woman to this house in many years. He is serious about you. I want you to know that this family is serious people. We do not do things halfway." He paused. "Marcus tells me your family has reservations." I didn't know what to say. "Yes," I said finally. Emmanuel nodded. "I respect honesty. I will tell you what I told Marcus. If you choose to be together, you will face things that are not fair. That is simply true. What matters is that you face them together. Are you prepared for that?" It was the most direct anyone had spoken to me in months about any of this. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. Grace hugged me before we left. She held on for a long time and then looked at my face and said, "You are a good woman. I can see it. My son needs a good woman, not an easy life." She patted my cheek. "Welcome." I cried in Marcus's car as we drove away. Silent, overwhelmed tears. "Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed?" Marcus asked. "The best overwhelmed," I said. He reached over and held my hand. He held it the whole 2 hours back to Atlanta. And somewhere in those 2 hours, I made my decision. Not dramatically, not suddenly. It had been building for months. But somewhere on that dark highway, holding Marcus's hand, still warmed from Grace Okafor's kitchen, I understood clearly what I wanted. I wanted this man. I wanted this life. And I was done waiting for my family's permission to want it. Marcus proposed on a Thursday evening in May in his apartment in Atlanta. Not a public proposal. Neither of us were those people. He cooked dinner. He put Fela Kuti on the record player. He had a small ring in a box that had belonged to his grandmother. a simple gold band with a single round diamond that was not large and was perfect. He said, I know what I want. I've known for a while. I want to build something with you. And I need you to know that whatever your family does, whatever they decide, I am in this. All the way. I'm asking you to be my wife. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We called his parents that night. Grace cried. Emmanuel said finally, with great satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for this for years. I called my parents the next morning. My mother answered. Mom, I said, I'm engaged. Marcus proposed last night. I said yes. The silence lasted long enough that I counted it. 7 seconds. Then my mother said, Cassidy, please don't do this. I said, I'm not asking for your permission, Mom. I'm telling you because you're my mother and I love you and I want you at my wedding. She said, I can't come to that wedding. I said, that's your choice. She said, your father won't come either. I said, tell him that's his choice too. She started crying. I had never, in 24 years, heard my mother cry on the phone. It did something to me, something that I hate to admit even now, because I know the tears were not for me. They were for her embarrassment and her fear and her idea of how my life was supposed to look. But they were my mother's tears, and they landed. Mom, I said. My voice had gone soft in spite of myself. I love you. I love him. Those two things are both true at the same time. I hope you can find a way to let them be. She hung up. 3 weeks before my wedding, my mother called me. I was at my apartment in Millhaven. I hadn't moved to Atlanta yet. That was coming after the wedding. It was late on a Wednesday night and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. My mother's voice was different. It had a flatness to it that I hadn't heard before, a kind of practiced steadiness that told me she had been preparing for this call. She said, your father and I have talked at length. We have prayed about this. I said, okay. She said, we are asking you one more time as your parents, as the people who love you more than anyone in this world, please do not go through with this marriage. I said, Mom, let me finish, she said. I need you to hear this. We are not just asking you to reconsider. We are telling you what will happen if you go through with it. If you marry Marcus, we cannot have a relationship with you. We cannot explain to this community, to our church, to our friends, to our family, why our daughter has made this choice. We cannot be part of a life built around this marriage. We love you. We always will. But we cannot support this. And if you go through with it, her voice cracked just slightly and then steadied again. You will not be welcome in this home. We will not attend the wedding. We will not have a relationship with your children. This is not what we want. But this is where this road leads. I was very quiet for a long time. Then I said, are you done? She said, Cassidy, are you done, Mom? Silence. I have listened to you, I said. Every call, every dinner, every sideways comment, and every prayer you've aimed at my relationship, I have heard all of it. And I need you to hear me now. I am marrying Marcus Okafor in 3 weeks. I am doing this because I love him, and because he is a good man, and because I deserve to build my life with someone who chooses me the way he chooses me. I am not asking for your blessing anymore. I was asking for it. I'm not anymore. I paused. But I am asking you one thing. I am asking you to be my mother. Not because Marcus needs your approval. He doesn't. But because I have loved you my whole life and I don't want to lose you. Not over this. Not over something this senseless. She didn't say anything. If you don't come to my wedding, I said, that door doesn't close. I'll leave it open. I'll leave it open for as long as I can. But I am walking down that aisle in 3 weeks regardless. And I am not going to apologize for it. She said very quietly, I hope you don't regret this. I hope you don't either, I said. That was the last time I spoke to my mother for 9 years. We got married on a Saturday in June, in a small botanical garden outside Atlanta that Marcus had found and that we'd both fallen in love with immediately. All green and golden quiet, the kind of place that felt like it was holding its breath in the best possible way. 42 people attended our wedding. Not one of them was a member of my biological family. Marcus's entire family came. Emmanuel and Grace and Adieze and Emeka and Priya and all the children, and a collection of aunts and cousins from Charlotte, and one indomitable great-aunt named Auntie Ngozi, who flew in from London specifically for the occasion, and arrived with 3 pieces of enormous luggage and opinions about the floral arrangements that she was not shy about sharing. Karen came from the marketing firm. 3 friends from college came. My one close friend from Millhaven, A woman named Darcy who had known me since third grade and who had looked me in the eye when I told her about Marcus and said simply, "Then I need to meet him," came in a yellow dress and cried through the entire ceremony. My sister Jolene texted me that morning. It said, "I'm sorry I can't be there. I do love you. I hope you're happy." I saved that text. I read it more times than I care to admit. My parents sent nothing. I did not cry about their absence on my wedding day. I made a decision not to let their choice become the story of my day. What I felt instead was something harder to name, a kind of clean grief, like a wound that had been sutured neatly. It hurt. It was healed. Both at once. Marcus and I wrote our own vows. He went first. He talked about how love, in his family, had always been defined by what you were willing to weather, that his parents had left everything they'd ever known because they believed in the life they could build together, and that he wanted to honor that by building something just as deliberate, just as brave, just as permanent. He looked at me the whole time he spoke, and his voice was steady in the way that it always was, and I thought, this is the person I want next to me for everything. When it was my turn, I had planned words. I had written them out and memorized them. But standing there, looking at him, surrounded by the people who had shown up, the family I was marrying into, the friends who had chosen to be there, the late afternoon gold pouring through the garden, I scrapped the prepared words. I said, "You asked me once where I stood." I said with you. That is still true. It will always be true, no matter what. He smiled, that slow, considered smile, and said quietly, just for me, no matter what. We were married. We moved to Atlanta the following month. Marcus's apartment became ours temporarily while we looked for a house, and we found one by October. A 3-bedroom Craftsman in Decatur, Atlanta's eastern neighbor, with a big front porch and an overgrown backyard that Marcus immediately began planning a garden for. My mother did not call. My father did not call. Jolene texted occasionally, short, careful messages on birthdays, nothing sustained. I wrote back. I kept the door open, the way I'd promised I would. I found a new job in Atlanta, a mid-sized marketing agency, real growth potential, the kind of work environment I hadn't known existed in my previous life. I was good at it. I got better at it. Within 2 years, I was managing accounts that would have seemed impossible to me in Millhaven, and within 4 years, I was a director. Marcus's career was thriving. He'd been promoted to VP of Creative at Meridian and was starting to get recognized in the Atlanta design community, speaking at events, building a reputation. He was extraordinary at what he did. Watching him work was one of my great private pleasures. We made friends. Real ones. The kind you have dinner with on Tuesday nights for no reason. The kind who have keys to your house. The kind whose children grow up alongside yours. Our friend group was a mix of Atlanta transplants and Atlanta lifers, black and white and everything else. And it was the first community I'd ever been part of that felt like it was composed of people who had each, in their own way, made a conscious choice about who they wanted to be. We struggled sometimes. Of course we did. No marriage is a honeymoon. We struggled with money in the early years. 2 young professionals and a mortgage will do that to you. We struggled with the particular weight of being an interracial couple in the American South, of navigating the invisible, 100 paper cuts a day reality of other people's assumptions and discomforts. We struggled occasionally with each other, with the different ways we'd been shaped, with the moments when our worldviews scraped against each other. But we did it together. Every time. We talked. We fought sometimes. We came back to each other. Always back to each other. The thing Marcus said in his vows, about building something deliberate, turned out to be exactly what we did. Nothing about our life was accidental. Every choice was made on purpose. The neighborhood we chose because of its schools and its diversity, the friendships we invested in, the traditions we created together, the way we talked to each other even when it was hard. In the absence of my birth family, we built a chosen family so complete that my children will grow up never knowing what it feels like to be in a room where they are not loved. Our daughter, Zoe Grace Okafor, was born 3 years after our wedding. She came into the world on a November morning, 8 pounds and 4 ounces, with Marcus's wide dark eyes and my stubborn mouth and a set of lungs that announced her arrival with theatrical conviction. I held her in that hospital room and understood, in the specific visceral way you can only understand when you are holding a living thing you made, that I would light the whole world on fire before I let anyone make her feel like anything less than the miracle she was. Marcus cried. I'm not going to tell you more about that because some things belong to us. But he cried and he held her, and he looked at me over her head and said something I will carry with me until I die. Grace Okafor flew in from Charlotte to be there. She held Zoe for an hour and sang to her in Igbo, quietly, like she was passing something down. Emmanuel stood in this corner of the room looking at his granddaughter with an expression that I had never seen on his formal, precise face before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. My mother did not call. My sister Jolene sent a card. It said, "Congratulations. She sounds beautiful. I hope she has your laugh." I cried over that card for a long time. My father sent nothing. 2 years after Zoe, our son Eli Emmanuel Okafor was born, named after his paternal grandfather, which made Emmanuel Okafor do the second unprecedented thing I'd witnessed him do, which was hug me for a very long time without saying a word. Eli was smaller, quieter, and in possession of what Marcus called deeply suspicious eyes that suggested he was assessing the situation before committing to it. He was, from the beginning, exactly like his father. Our children were born into a world we had built specifically for them. They were surrounded by family, the Okafors, our friends, the community we'd made. They were Nigerian and American and Southern and neither and both. They were ours. And I want you to understand something. This is important. This is maybe the most important thing in this whole story. My children have never met my parents. Not once. For the first 9 years of my eldest daughter's life, for 7 years of my son's, my parents did not exist to them. Not as villains. Not as an absence. Because I made a deliberate choice not to tell my children that there were grandparents who had rejected them. As far as Zoe and Eli knew, Grandma and Grandpa were Emmanuel and Grace Okafor in Charlotte, and they were more than enough. I want you to think about what that means. What it costs a person to hold that every day in your chest. To look at your daughter's face and know, not suspect, know, that there are people who could be loving her and are choosing not to. That cost is real. I paid it every day. And then one Tuesday morning, the bill came due in a different way entirely. 9 years is a long time. Long enough that a wound becomes a scar, becomes the landscape of your body, just part of how you're shaped. Long enough that you stop checking your phone after major life events to see if maybe this time there will be a message from your mother. Long enough that you stop rehearsing the conversation you'd have with your father if he ever called. 9 years is long enough to heal. I had healed. Not perfectly. I don't think estrangement from your parents ever heals perfectly. But I had healed in the way that matters. I had a life I was proud of. I had a marriage that was real. I had children who were happy. I had friends who were family. I had built, from the rubble of what my parents had blown up, something that was entirely mine. There were hard moments. The anniversary of my wedding, when I sometimes lay awake thinking about who hadn't been there. Every Mother's Day, which I had converted into a celebration of Grace Okafor and of myself as a mother, but which still carried in its edges a shadow. The first day Zoe went to kindergarten, when I wanted to call my mother the way you instinctively want to call your mother, and I picked up my phone and looked at her number. I had never deleted it, and put the phone back down. But I was okay. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes next. I was genuinely, solidly okay. And then, in the fall of Zoe's 9th year and Eli's 7th, my world shifted again. The first sign that something was happening came from an unlikely source, Darcy. Darcy had stayed in Millhaven. She was married now, 2 kids, still my best friend despite the distance. The kind of friend you can go 3 months without talking to and pick up exactly where you left off. We talked every few weeks, and those conversations were a lifeline. Part nostalgia, part genuine love, part the particular comfort of someone who knew you before you were formed. In October, Darcy called on a Tuesday evening. Something in her voice was different. Careful, like she was feeling out the ice before she stepped on it. "How are you doing?" she asked. The question had an extra weight to it. "Good," I said. "Great, actually. Zoe made the soccer team. Eli's doing this robotics thing at school that is way over my head, but Marcus is obsessed with it. Cass, Darcy said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not freak out." Now I'm going to freak out. Please don't. A pause. "Have you heard anything about your mom and dad recently?" I went still. "No," I said carefully. "Why?" "Okay," another pause. "I ran into your sister at the grocery store last week. I hadn't seen her in a while, and Cass, she looked rough. Like really rough. We talked for a few minutes, and she said..." Darcy hesitated. "She said your parents are going through some things. She didn't say what exactly, but she mentioned that your dad had some health stuff last year. She didn't give details, and that your mom had been," she used the word, "struggling." I was quiet. I didn't want to not tell you, Darcy said. I thought you'd want to know. Yeah, I said. Yeah. Thank you. We talked for a little while longer, and then I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I didn't call. I thought about it. I genuinely did. But I didn't call. Because I had learned, over 9 years, that the door I'd left open needed to be opened from their side. I had made that choice deliberately, and I stood by it. But I thought about it more than I'd thought about them in a long time. 2 weeks after Darcy's call, I got a letter. An actual letter. Handwritten, in an envelope with a Millhaven postmark and my maiden name, Cassidy Mercer, written in handwriting I recognized even after 9 years as my mother's. I stood at my mailbox for a full minute before I brought it inside. I didn't open it that day. I put it on the kitchen counter and walked away from it. I went through the afternoon pickup routine, made dinner, helped Zoe with her homework, read to Eli, put them both to bed. Then I sat at the kitchen table after Marcus got home, and I told him about the letter. He looked at it for a moment. Do you want to read it? I don't know. Do you want me to read it first? No, I said immediately. No, it's mine. Okay. Stay with me while I read it? He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. I'm here. I opened the letter. My mother's handwriting had always been neat, the handwriting of a woman who'd been taught penmanship in an era when it mattered. Even now, even in a letter that I could tell had been written with difficult emotion, each letter was formed carefully. Cassidy, I don't know if you will read this. I know I have given you every reason not to. I am writing anyway, because there are things that need to be said, and I have not been brave enough to say them until now. Your father had a heart attack in February. He is recovering, but it was serious. He spent 11 days in the hospital. During those 11 days, I sat by his bed and thought about many things. I am not writing this to ask for sympathy, or to make you feel guilty, or to use your father's illness as a way to get what I want. I am writing this because what happened with your father scared me enough to look at things I have been unwilling to look at for 9 years. I have missed you. I have missed you every single day. I know that does not fix anything. I know missing you does not undo what I said to you or what we did. But I want you to know that it is true. I understand if you cannot forgive me. I understand if you do not write back. But I wanted you to know that I see, now, maybe too late, that I was wrong. What we asked you to do was wrong. The way we treated your marriage was wrong. I am ashamed of it. I hope you are happy, Cassidy. I hope your life is everything you built it to be. I love you. That has always been true, even when I was being the worst version of myself. Mom, I sat with that letter for a long time. Marcus waited. Finally, I said, she says she's sorry. I heard, he said, because I had read it aloud without intending to. She says she was wrong. I know. She says she missed me every day. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, how do you feel? And I tried to answer him honestly, the way I always did. I said, I don't know yet. I need to sit with it. He nodded. He got up and kissed the top of my head and said, take whatever time you need. I'll follow your lead. That was one of the things I loved most about Marcus, that he always meant exactly what he said. I wrote back to my mother 2 weeks later. A short letter. I told her I had read her letter. I told her I was glad my father was recovering. I told her I needed time. I told her the door was still open, that it had always been open, but that she would have to walk through it slowly because a lot of trust had been lost and rebuilding it would take work. I told her nothing about Zoe or Eli yet. That was not information I was ready to share on the basis of one letter. She wrote back within a week. Longer this time. More specific in her regrets. She mentioned Marcus by name. I know I was not fair to Marcus, and I am sorry for that too, which I read 3 times, and which landed differently than anything else in the letter. We wrote back and forth for 3 months. Old-fashioned letters, like it was 1987 I found, slowly that something in me was cautiously willing to receive what she was offering. Not all the way open, but willing. And then my father wrote to me for the first time. His letter was 1 paragraph, in his handwriting, which was exactly what you'd expect of a man who'd grown up on a farm, functional, unbeautiful, entirely honest. Cassidy, your mother tells me you've been writing to each other. I want you to know that I agree with everything she said. I was wrong. I don't have more words for it than that. I was wrong and I'm sorry and I love you and I always have. If you'll have me back in your life, I'd like to be there. Dad, I sat at my kitchen counter and cried for a long time. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that is the body releasing something it's been holding for 9 years. Marcus found me there and sat down and put his arm around me and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, what do you want to do? I want to let them back in, I said. Slowly. Carefully. Okay, he said. But Cass, I need something from you. Anything. I need to be part of this conversation. I'm not saying I get a veto. But this affects me. This affects our kids. He paused. I want to be at whatever table this reconciliation happens at. Of course, I said. Absolutely. I would never. I know you wouldn't do it intentionally, he said gently. I just need us to be clear. We're clear, I said. You're in every room of this. Every single one. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon in January, almost 9 years to the day since I'd last spoken to her. My hands were shaking. I sat in my car in the driveway because I didn't want my children to hear in case it went badly. She answered on the second ring. Cassidy? Her voice was older. 9 years older. Quieter. Hi, Mom. A long silence in which neither of us breathed. Then she said, Oh, thank God. Oh, baby. And she started crying. And I started crying. We didn't solve everything in that phone call. We didn't solve everything in the 10 phone calls after it. 9 years of estrangement doesn't resolve in a Sunday afternoon. There were things that needed to be said that took time to say, and things that needed to be heard that took time to hear. But we started. We actually started. I told her about my life, about the house and the job and the friends and the community we'd built. I told her about Zoe's soccer and Eli's robotics and the garden Marcus had turned into something genuinely beautiful. I talked for a long time, and she listened without interrupting, and I could hear in her listening that she was receiving it all, filing it away, making herself present to a life she had been absent from. When I told her about the children, about Zoe and Eli, she went very quiet. Then she said, I have grandchildren. Not as a question, as a realization, an accounting of what had been lost. Yes, I said. Oh, Cassidy. Her voice broke completely. I've missed so much. You have, I said. And I said it gently, because she already knew it, and saying it harder wouldn't help anything. Do they know about me? Not yet, I said. I wanted to protect them. I wasn't going to tell them about grandparents who'd rejected them. That was wise, she said in a voice that cost her something. That was the right thing. I'm not sure when I introduce you to them, I said. Or how. That's a conversation Marcus and I need to have together. And before you meet them, I need to know that you're prepared. They are not white children, Mom. They are beautiful, brilliant, mixed-race children. And if you're going to be in their lives, you need to show up for all of who they are. I will not expose them to anything less than complete love. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I understand. And I need you to know, I have done a lot of thinking in 9 years. A lot of reading. A lot of shame-facing. I am not the person I was. I still have a long way to go. But I am different, Cassidy. I want you to give me the chance to show you. I will, I said. We will. It's going to be slow. Slow is fine, she said. Slow is more than I deserve. 3 months after that first phone call, my parents came to Atlanta. This was Marcus's idea, actually. He thought it was better than asking them to host us in Millhaven. Better for it to happen on our ground, in our home, where we were comfortable and in control of the environment. He spent a Saturday cleaning the house with a thoroughness that suggested he was nervous, and he actually cooked, a real meal, Nigerian and Southern together, because that's what our life was. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. My father looked older. The heart attack had aged him. There was gray in his hair that hadn't been there, and a careful way he moved that told you his body had been reminded of its limits. But he was still my father. The same hands, the same walk, the same expression of barely concealed emotion that he kept so contained it almost wasn't visible. He walked through my front door and he stopped, and he looked around at my house, at the family photos on the wall, at the children's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, at the life I'd built. And something crossed his face that I had no word for. Then he looked at me and he said, You did real good, Cassidy. And I walked to him and he hugged me, really hugged me, the way he hadn't since I was about 12 years old, and it stopped being cool to hug your dad in public, and I held on and let myself have it. My mother came in behind him. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was larger. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she pulled me to her and whispered into my hair, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I know, Mom, I said. I know. Then Marcus came out of the kitchen. He came out the way Marcus does things, with intention, without performance. He was wearing an apron because he'd been cooking. He walked across the room and extended his hand to my father and said, Mr. Mercer, I'm Marcus. I'm glad you're here. My father shook his hand, long and firm. And then, and this is the moment I have replayed in my mind more than any other moment in this whole story, my father said, "I should have done this a long time ago." "I'm sorry I didn't." Marcus said, "Sir, the fact that you're here now matters." My mother stepped forward and Marcus turned to her. She shook his hand and then, surprising all of us, including herself, she pulled him into a hug. Short, a little awkward, but real. She said into his shoulder, "Thank you for taking care of her." Marcus said very gently, "She takes care of herself. I just get to be there for it." My mother laughed through her tears. Dinner was long and sometimes awkward and sometimes easy, and full of the particular charged quality of a table full of people who are all trying very hard and know it. Zoe came home from a friend's house in the middle of it and was introduced to her grandparents with the cheerful directness of a 9-year-old who doesn't fully understand that this is a significant moment. She shook my father's hand and told him seriously that she was on the soccer team and expected him to come to a game, which he promised he would. She asked my mother about her hair, which my mother laughed about for the rest of the evening. Eli was more reserved, that suspicious assessment, but by the end of the evening, he had brought out his robotics project to show my father, who sat on the living room floor with his bad heart and his 9 years older body, and spent 45 minutes learning about Eli's robot with what seemed like genuine interest. That night, after my parents had gone to their hotel and the children were in bed and the kitchen was clean, Marcus and I sat on the back porch. It was March, cool enough to need a sweater. "How do you feel?" I asked him. "Cautiously hopeful," he said. "And protective. I'm going to keep being protective." "Me too," I said. "But they showed up," he said. "And they were genuine today." That was real. It was, I agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your dad apologized to me." "I know." "I heard." "He didn't have to do that." "No," I said. "He wanted to." Marcus nodded slowly. "That matters," he said. "That matters to me." I leaned against him in the cool March night, and we sat there for a long time, listening to the city and the garden and the quiet house full of our sleeping children. The next 6 months were careful. That's the word. Careful. My parents came back to Atlanta once more, a longer visit. We went up to Millhaven twice, hard both times in different ways. The ghost of who I'd been there and who I'd become brushing against each other in those streets. But we went. The children met Jolene and her family, which was its own emotional experience. Jolene hugged me for so long that Travis had to clear his throat to remind us we were in a parking lot. My mother was trying. I could see it, the effort she was making, visible in every interaction, the way she chose her words carefully and listened more than she spoke and sometimes said something imperfect, but always came back and acknowledged it. She was doing the work. Imperfectly, slowly, with the stumbling quality of someone learning a new language, but genuinely. My father was my father. Quiet. Steady. Present. Less verbal in his transformation, but no less real. He drove up to Atlanta for Zoe's soccer tournament and sat in the bleachers for 4 hours in October heat and cheered himself hoarse. When I thanked him afterward, he said, "Don't thank me for showing up for my granddaughter," and went back to loading folding chairs into the car. Things were fragile, but moving in the right direction. And then, 2 weeks before that rainy Tuesday, something shifted. I noticed it first in a phone call. My mother seemed distracted, anxious, turning a corner in conversation to avoid something. When I asked if everything was okay, she said, "Yes, fine, just tired." Then Jolene called me, which was unusual. Our communication was mostly text, and she said, "Hey, Cass, I need to tell you something. Don't freak out." "Stop saying that to me," I said. "It always makes me freak out. Mom and Dad's situation, it's more serious than you know." I sat down. "Tell me." What Jolene told me was this. In the years since my father's heart attack, his medical bills had been substantial. His recovery had required ongoing care. My mother, who had never worked outside the home, had no income of her own. They had savings, but they'd been drawn down. 2 months ago, they had gotten notice from the bank. They were going to lose the house. My childhood home. The house with the yellow kitchen and the cross-stitched Bible verses. "Why didn't they tell me?" I asked. "You know, Mom," Jolene said. "She would rather suffer in silence than ask for help." "But she could have—" "I know," Jolene said. "She should have. I've been trying to help, but Travis and I are stretched thin with the kids in school and the business, and—" She stopped. "I don't know what she's going to do, Cass. I think she might be coming to you." "Coming to me?" "She mentioned Atlanta," Jolene said carefully. I was very quiet. "I wanted you to know before she showed up," Jolene said. "It was raining when I woke up." The kind of rain that meant the school drop-off would be a hassle, and Marcus's commute would take longer, and the garden would appreciate it. Normal Tuesday morning stuff. I got the kids up, managed Eli's ongoing protest against breakfast that contained any visible nutrition, got both of them out the door and into the car for drop-off, came home, changed into my work-from-home clothes, which at this point in my life meant a decent blouse and my husband's old Columbia hoodie, and made my second cup of coffee. I was standing at this kitchen counter looking at my laptop and my coffee and thinking about a presentation I had to finalize by noon. The doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. Marcus was at the office. The kids were at school. I looked at my watch, 9:17 in the morning. I went to the front door and looked through the window. Standing on my porch, soaking wet with a rolling suitcase and a large duffel bag, mascara tracking down her face from the rain and the crying I could tell had been happening even before she got wet, was my mother, Patricia Mercer, 72 years old, smaller than she'd been even 6 months ago, standing in the rain at my door with her luggage. I stood there for a moment, just a moment. Then I opened the door. She looked at me, this look, this particular naked look I had never seen on my mother's face before, not in my whole life, and she said, "I need somewhere to stay." Not, "I'm sorry to show up unannounced." Not, "I know I should have called." Not, "Can we talk?" Just, "I need somewhere to stay." And I stood in my doorway and looked at my mother and felt about 40 different things at once. Love and grief and anger and protectiveness and exhaustion and the particular pain of seeing someone you love diminished by circumstances they partly brought on themselves. And I said, "You're soaking wet. Come inside." I made her tea. My mother had always drunk tea, sweet tea in the Southern style, but also just plain hot tea when she was upset, and she was clearly upset. She sat at my kitchen table in a dry change of clothes I'd found for her, an oversized Atlanta United sweatshirt of Zoe's that she put on without a word, which somehow moved me, and she wrapped her hands around the mug and she talked. She and my father had known for months that the house was gone. My father's medical bills had been worse than Jolene knew. He'd needed a second procedure, less acute than the first, but expensive in the relentless way of American medical care. Their savings were depleted. They'd been too proud to say so. Or too ashamed. Or both. My father was staying with Jolene for now. There wasn't room for two of them there. Jolene's house was 3 bedrooms and already full. My mother had driven to Atlanta. Hadn't called first. She said she'd tried to form the call and couldn't. She said she knew it was wrong to show up like this. She said she hadn't known what else to do. And then she said, and this is the part I'd been both dreading and, somewhere in the dark of myself, expecting, she said, "I was hoping we could stay here for a while. Your father and I. Just until we figure out what's next." I said nothing for a long moment. I set down my own mug and looked at my hands on the table, the wedding ring Marcus had put on my finger 9 years ago, and I thought about what I was going to say. Because here is the thing. Here is the thing that I need you to understand. If you're sitting wherever you are watching this, I had left my door open. I had extended my hand. I had rebuilt a relationship with my parents over the past year, slowly and carefully, because I believed in the possibility of change, and because those were my parents and I loved them in the stubborn, unconditional way you love people who shaped you even when they hurt you. I had done all of that work. And here she was, asking for more. And part of me, the part that had been 24 years old and crying in a car in a parking lot after my mother hung up on me, wanted to say no. Wanted to say, "You lost the right to ask me for things when you issued that ultimatum. You made your choice. Now live with it." But the other part of me, the part that had grown up in 9 years of a chosen life, the part that had watched Marcus's parents build something with nothing, the part that had held my daughter in a hospital room and understood what it was to love someone with your whole body, that part of me knew something different. She was my mother, and she was in trouble, and she had changed. Those 3 things were all true at the same time. I called Marcus at the office. "Your mother is there," he said. "Not a question." "Jolene called you?" "She texted me 20 minutes after she texted you," he said. "I was waiting for you to call." Of course he was. Of course Jolene had alerted him. Of course Marcus had been sitting at his desk waiting, not charging in, but present and informed and ready. "She's asking to stay," I said. "Both of them eventually. She wants to stay here while they figure things out." A silence. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "I need to talk to you. Not just a quick phone call, really talk." "I'll come home," he said immediately. "You don't have to." "Cass, I'm coming home." He was home in 45 minutes. He came in through the back door, hung up his jacket, said hello to my mother with a warmth that I knew cost him something and that he offered anyway, because that was who he was. Then he looked at me, later. My mother, to her credit, stood up and said, "Marcus, I shouldn't have come without calling. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly." Marcus said, "It's all right, Patricia." And he said her name with a deliberateness that acknowledged all of it, the history, the reconciliation, the current moment, in 2 words. She sat back down. He poured himself coffee and sat beside me, and the 3 of us had a conversation that lasted 2 hours. My mother explained their situation in full, the bills, the foreclosure, what she and my father had and didn't have. She was honest in a way that clearly cost her pride. She didn't dress it up. She didn't make excuses. She laid it out. Marcus asked questions, practical ones, the kind that came from someone who thought about logistics carefully. What were their income sources? Did my father's health allow him to work? What was their timeline? Had they spoken to a financial advisor? What did they need in the immediate term versus the medium term? My mother answered all of it. Every question. Without defensiveness. Then Marcus was quiet for a moment and he looked at me. "I want to talk to Cassidy privately," he said. "Not to make a decision without you. Just to have a conversation. Is that okay?" "Of course," my mother said. She picked up her tea and went to sit in the living room, giving us the kitchen. Marcus and I looked at each other across our kitchen table. "Tell me what you're feeling," he said first. I told him everything. The pull toward her and the protective anger and the exhaustion and the complicated love and the part of me that wanted to close the door and the part that couldn't. He listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "Okay, here's where I am." And what Marcus said to me in our kitchen that Tuesday afternoon was this: "I don't trust this situation yet. I want to be honest with you about that. Not because I doubt your mother's sincerity. I think she means what she says. But showing up unannounced with luggage is not the same as calling ahead. It puts you in a position where saying no feels like abandonment, and I don't think that was consciously calculated, but the effect is the same. So I want us to be clear that this is a decision, not a default. If we do this, we do it because we chose it." I nodded. "Second thing," he said. "This is my home too. Our children's home. If your parents are in this house, I need things to be clear. I am Zoe and Eli's father. I am your husband. I am not a guest in my own house, and neither are your parents guests in the sense that they get to set the temperature. We set the temperature. Are we agreed on that?" "Completely," I said. "Third thing." He paused. "Your father. He's got medical needs, he's older, this is a complicated situation. If they come here, both of them, we're not just offering a couch. We're potentially taking on a level of responsibility that is real. I need to know that you see that, and that you're not minimizing it because you're trying to make up for lost time." That one landed. "I hear you," I said. I need to think about whether I'm doing that." "I know," he said. "And you can think about it. I'm not saying the answer is no. I'm saying the answer needs to be clear-eyed." I looked at my husband across the table, this man who had every reason in the world to say they don't deserve our help and who was instead sitting with me and working through it like the partner he had always been. And I felt something that I don't entirely have words for. Not surprise. Something deeper than surprise. Just the continuous, renewed recognition of who he was. "What do you want?" I asked him. "Not what you think is right. What do you want?" He thought about it. Really thought. "I want your kids to have their grandparents," he said. "Zoe and Eli deserve that. And he stopped. "I want you to have your parents back. The real version. Not this complicated, half-healed thing. The real one. And I think this might be the thing that either makes that possible or reveals that it isn't." "So you're saying yes?" "I'm saying my father arrived 4 days later. Jolene drove him up on a Saturday morning. He walked into our house and shook Marcus's hand, and then he sat down at our kitchen table and didn't say much for a while, just looked around at everything with the same expression he'd had the first time, the accounting of what he'd missed. Then Eli came downstairs in his robotics club t-shirt and said, without preamble, "Grandpa, can you help me with the gear ratio on my robot?" And my father's face cleared into something uncomplicated and pure. "Show me what you've got," he said. They spent the rest of the morning on it. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Our house is 3 bedrooms, which meant Zoe and Eli were sharing, which Eli handled with his characteristic philosophical skepticism. My parents were in Eli's room. The geometry of a house full of 6 people is different from the geometry of 4, and we all had to learn it. There were moments that were hard. Moments where my mother said something, usually something small, something about the children, something that revealed old patterns, and I had to find the words to address it directly without derailing everything. Those conversations were not fun, but we had them, and my mother, to her lasting credit, received them. She didn't get defensive. She didn't make it about her. She listened and she adjusted. My father was easier in some ways. He was a man of routine, and he inserted himself into our routine with a kind of quiet helpfulness. He fixed things that were broken. He was a reliable presence for the kids. He and Marcus developed an unspoken language of Saturday morning coffee and sports, and the occasional long conversation that I was not privy to, and that I deliberately did not try to eavesdrop on. Something was happening in this house. I could feel it. It was imperfect and sometimes awkward, and full of the specific tension of people trying to love each other across a history they couldn't undo. But it was real. "It's try," he said. "With conditions. With honesty. With the understanding that this is our house and our rules and our children, and that if it's not working, we say so." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'll go back to talking to her," I said. "I'll come with you," he said. And we did. We sat back down at the kitchen table, all three of us. Marcus spoke first. He did it with the quiet directness that I loved most about him. No preamble, no softening, just honest. "Patricia, I want to be straightforward with you. Cassidy and I have talked, and we want to help your family through this. You and Robert are welcome to stay here while you get back on your feet. But I need to put some things on the table." My mother nodded. Her hands were folded on the table like she was in church. "This is our home," Marcus said. "Cassidy's and mine and our children's. When you are here, you are guests, and we love you. But what happens in this house? How the children are raised? What conversations happen at this table? What values are in the air? That's ours. I need to know you understand that." "I understand," my mother said. "I also need to say something else." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not holding the past against you. I want to be clear about that. You hurt Cassidy deeply, and you hurt me too, in a different way, and there's work still being done on all of that. But I'm not sitting here with a ledger. I'm sitting here as Cassidy's husband trying to figure out how to do right by my family. Which includes you now, if you'll let it." My mother's composure broke. Not dramatically. She didn't sob. She wasn't that kind of woman. But her eyes filled, and her chin did the particular thing that chins do when you are trying very hard not to cry. "Marcus," she said. And she had to stop and collect herself. "I owe you an apology that I've been owing you for almost 10 years. What I said to my daughter, what we said, what we did, was about my fear and my prejudice and my failure to look beyond what I'd been taught. It had nothing to do with your worth as a man or a husband or a father. You are, I can see who you are now. You are a good man. And I am deeply sorry that I couldn't see that from the beginning." A silence. Then Marcus said, "I accept that." And he meant it, not as a performance, not as graciousness. He meant it because that's who he was. "Now let's figure out what your family needs." My father arrived 4 days later. Jolene drove him up on a Saturday morning. He walked into our house and shook Marcus's hand, and then he sat down at our kitchen table and didn't say much for a while, just looked around at everything with the same expression he'd had the first time, the accounting of what he'd missed. Then Eli came downstairs in his robotics club t-shirt and said, without preamble, "Grandpa, can you help me with the gear ratio on my robot?" And my father's face cleared into something uncomplicated and pure. "Show me what you've got," he said. They spent the rest of the morning on it. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Our house is 3 bedrooms, which meant Zoe and Eli were sharing, which Eli handled with his characteristic philosophical skepticism. My parents were in Eli's room. The geometry of a house full of 6 people is different from the geometry of 4, and we all had to learn it. There were moments that were hard. Moments where my mother said something, usually something small, something about the children, something that revealed old patterns, and I had to find the words to address it directly without derailing everything. Those conversations were not fun, but we had them, and my mother, to her lasting credit, received them. She didn't get defensive. She didn't make it about her. She listened and she adjusted. My father was easier in some ways. He was a man of routine, and he inserted himself into our routine with a kind of quiet helpfulness. He fixed things that were broken. He was a reliable presence for the kids. He and Marcus developed an unspoken language of Saturday morning coffee and sports, and the occasional long conversation that I was not privy to, and that I deliberately did not try to eavesdrop on. Something was happening in this house. I could feel it. It was imperfect and sometimes awkward, and full of the specific tension of people trying to love each other across a history they couldn't undo. But it was real. 6 weeks after my parents moved in, on a Thursday night after the kids were in bed and Marcus was on a work deadline and my father had gone to sleep early, his health still required that, my mother and I were in the kitchen together cleaning up after dinner. And we started talking. Not the careful version. The real version. She asked me what the first year after the wedding had been like. And I told her. I didn't soften it. I told her about checking my phone and finding nothing. I told her about the first holiday, Thanksgiving, our first one, Marcus and me and a few friends in our tiny apartment, and the way I'd put a brave face on it all day and then cried after everyone left. I told her about the day Zoe was born and how I'd reached for my phone and put it back down. I told her about all the moments over 9 years when I'd needed my mother and my mother wasn't there. She cried. Properly, really cried, the way she hadn't in front of me before. When she could speak, she said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without thinking it's an excuse, because it's not." I waited. "In the year after you left," she said, "your father and I, we were not okay. We told ourselves we'd done the right thing. We told ourselves you'd come back, that you'd realize we were right. And when you didn't," she stopped. "When you didn't, we doubled down. Because admitting we were wrong would have meant admitting what we'd done. And we weren't ready." She wiped her face. "I spent years being angry at you. At Marcus. At what I told myself you'd chosen over your family. And that anger kept me from seeing what was true." "What changed?" I asked. "Your father's heart attack." She said it simply. Sitting in that hospital room, thinking I might lose him, I saw so clearly that I had already lost so much that I didn't have to lose. I had lost you. I had lost your children. I had never even met my grandchildren. She shook her head. "We talk about faith in my church, Cassidy. About what you believe. I've been in that church my whole life. But I sat in that hospital room and I thought, what have I actually been living? What have I been believing with my actual life, not my words?" And I was ashamed of the answer. I looked at my mother for a long time. "I forgive you, Mom," I said. "Not because what you did didn't hurt. It did. It hurt for years, and it still has places where it hurts. But I forgive you because I don't want to carry the not forgiving anymore. And because I can see that you changed. And because," my voice caught, "because you're my mom. And I missed you." She reached across the table and took my hand. We sat there for a long time. 2 months in, Marcus and my father had the conversation. I wasn't in the room. Marcus told me about it afterward. My father had been reading. He'd become a big reader in retirement, which surprised me pleasantly, and he'd been reading specifically about race in America, about the history of it, about the ways it operated. He'd asked Marcus, one Saturday morning, if he could ask him some questions. Marcus said yes. What followed, Marcus said, was one of the most honest conversations he'd ever had with a white man twice his age. My father asked questions, not defensively, not rhetorically, but genuinely. He asked what it had been like growing up black in Charlotte in the 80s and 90s. He asked about Marcus's parents' experience as immigrants. He asked what it was like to raise black children in America, what fears Marcus carried that my father wouldn't have had to carry for me. Marcus answered all of it. Honestly, without performing anger, without letting my father off the hook, without softening it for comfort. And my father listened, really listened. At the end, my father said, "I spent my whole life thinking I was a decent man. And then my daughter married someone I couldn't accept, and I chose to lose her rather than examine why. That's not a decent man. That's a coward." Marcus said, "You're here now." My father said, "Is that enough?" Marcus said, "It's a start. I have been sitting with this story for 9 years, and I have been telling it to you for, well, however long you've been watching. And I want to leave you with the things I actually know to be true, not the things that make for a tidy ending. Here is what I know. Love is not a feeling. It is a decision, made daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes in the middle of the night when you're exhausted and afraid. Marcus and I made that decision on a highway in North Carolina, and we have been making it every day since. The decision never gets easier. It gets more certain. Family is not blood. I mean this without bitterness. The family I built with Marcus, the Okafors, our friends, our community, that is my family. It was my family before my parents came back. It will be my family regardless of what happens next. Blood family is one kind of family. Chosen family is another. I am lucky enough to have both now. I do not take that for granted. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. I forgave my parents because carrying the unforgiveness was heavier than I was willing to carry anymore. Not because they earned it. Not because the hurt wasn't real. Because I decided that their choice was not going to be the defining fact of my life. That was my choice to make, and I made it. You have that choice too, whatever your version of the story is. People can change. I mean, genuinely, meaningfully change. My mother is not the woman who said, "If you marry that man, you are no longer my daughter." She is a different woman, shaped by loss and shame and 9 years of reckoning with what she did. The change is imperfect and ongoing, and sometimes she says something that still catches me wrong and we have to address it. But she changed. My father changed. I didn't think they would, and they did. I am grateful for that. I am also grateful that I waited until the change was real before I let them back in all the way. Both things are true. Your life belongs to you. I am going to say this as clearly as I can because I think this is the one that matters most. Your life belongs to you. Not to your parents, not to your community, not to the town you grew up in, or the church you went to, or the people who have opinions about who you should love. Yours. You get to decide what it looks like. You get to decide who is in it. You get to choose your person and build your family and make your home. People will have things to say about that. Some of those people will claim to love you. And their love may be real. It may be genuine. It may just be limited and fearful and locked inside a box of old beliefs. But their love does not get to decide your life. Only you get to decide that. I decided at 24, standing on a botanical garden lawn in June, 42 people watching, holding the hands of a man who had asked me where I stood and accepted my answer without condition. I decided. And every beautiful thing in my life came from that decision. When Marcus told me this, I had to sit down. "How did you leave it?" I asked. "He said he wanted to do better," Marcus said. And I believe him. I think he does. "Are you okay?" I asked. "That's a lot to carry." Marcus looked at me. "I've been carrying it my whole life," he said. "The least your father can do is pick up some of it." 6 months after my mother appeared on my porch in the rain, here is where we are. My parents are still with us. They're beginning to look at independent living options. There are some communities nearby, affordable and appropriate for their needs, and that transition will happen, slowly, in the coming months. But the urgency is off. We have time to do it right. My father's health has stabilized. He has a good doctor in Atlanta now, regular appointments, a medication regimen that Marcus actually helped him organize into a system because my father, bless him, was handling it with the chaos of a man who did not believe in systems until Marcus made him a spreadsheet. My mother volunteers twice a week at a food pantry 3 miles from our house. She comes home from it lighter. I think she needed to be useful. Zoe has taken complete ownership of having grandparents and exercises, this ownership with the authority of a 9-year-old who has been told she can ask for anything. She has requested that my mother teach her to make the biscuits. The lessons have been ongoing. The biscuits have been improving. Marcus says they're not as good as Grace Okafor's jollof rice, and this has become the centerpiece of a running, affectionate debate at our dinner table that makes my mother laugh every single time. Eli has bonded with my father over, of all things, woodworking. My father built furniture in his garage for years, a hobby I hadn't thought about since childhood, and Eli discovered this fact and has been relentless in his interest. They spend Saturday mornings in the garage together. Marcus built them a small workbench. It is objectively the most wholesome thing I have ever seen. My marriage is good, really good. The kind of good that comes from going through hard things together and choosing each other at every turn. Marcus is still the most intentional person I have ever known, still the most honest, still the man who holds me accountable and holds me close in equal measure. We are not perfect. We are real. I choose that every day. My chosen family, our Atlanta family, has been extraordinary through all of this. They have welcomed the new complexity with the generosity that chosen family always shows, because chosen family knows, better than anyone, that family is made of more than blood. Darcy cried when I told her about my mother moving in. Then she said, "I called it," which was only partially true, but which I let her have. Grace and Emmanuel Okafor have met my parents. That meeting, a Sunday dinner at our house in February, all 4 grandparents and all our friends and children running in every direction, was the most complicated, joyful, improbable gathering I have ever been part of. Grace and my mother spent 45 minutes comparing biscuit and puff-puff recipes. Emmanuel and my father talked about engineering and woodworking and the 1985 World Series for 2 hours in a corner of the living room. At the end of the evening, Grace hugged my mother and said something in her ear that I couldn't hear, and my mother nodded and held on tight. I don't know what Grace said. I'll probably never know. I decided I don't need to. Marcus, if you're watching this, and he will watch it, he always watches them. He pretends he doesn't, but he always does. I want to say something to you that I should say out loud more often. You have never once made me feel like the hard parts of our life were your fault. You have never weaponized your pain against me. You have never asked me to choose between you and the possibility of repairing what my family broke. You held space for my grief over them, even when their grief was caused by their rejection of you. That is not a small thing. That is the most extraordinary thing. You are a great father. Not just competent or present or reliable, though you are all of those. You are great at it. Watching you with Zoe and Eli, watching the people they are becoming and the specific shade of your influence, your curiosity, your directness, your insistence that they be thoughtful, is the best thing I have ever watched. You were right to say no matter what at the altar. You meant it. And so did I. No matter what. Zoe. Eli. You're too young to watch this right now, but someday you will. I want you to know that you are worth every hard thing. Every sleepless night of grief. Every Sunday when I picked up the phone and put it down. Every birthday that passed without a call from the grandparents you didn't know existed yet. You are worth all of it. You are worth all of it. You are Nigerian and American. You are your father's strength and your mother's stubbornness and grace. Okafor's grace and Emmanuel Okafor's precision and yes, some of your Grandma Pat's cooking instinct and your Grandpa Robert's patience with broken things. You are the whole of what love can build when it refuses to apologize for itself. Do not let anyone, ever, in your whole lives, make you feel like you need to explain or justify or diminish the fullness of who you are. You don't. You are magnificent. Be that. And when someone asks you where you stand where I stood. With love. Completely. You made it to the end. Thank you. I know this was long. It needed to be long. Some stories can't be told in 5 minutes. Some stories need every chapter. If you are in the middle of your own version of this, if you are standing at the altar of your own choice, afraid of who won't be there, I want to say to you what no one said to me when I needed to hear it. You're going to be okay. Not immediately. Not without grief. But okay. Deeply, genuinely, permanently okay. The people who show up for your real life are the people who are meant to be in it. And the life you build when you stop apologizing for it is the life that was always supposed to be yours. Choose your person. Build your family. Leave the door open. And make something beautiful. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Tell me your story, or just drop your location so I know where in this world someone heard this and felt a little less alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone standing at the edge of their own hard decision, someone who has been told to choose between love and belonging, share this video with them. You never know whose Tuesday morning this might change. With love,